Hello everyone, Camilla here from Decodable Readers Australia. Today we're going to have a look at supported reading. Now this is a time where the educator sits with a student and supports their practice time. Now there are some key considerations that we need to make sure that we have in place in our classrooms or even at home if you're watching this as a parent. The first key consideration is the type of text that you're using. As many of you would already know if you've been following our journey, decodable readers are definitely the resource that you require in your classrooms and at home to be able to support a student first learning to read in those first couple of years of school. Now, even with decodable readers, it's important to consider some of these things. On the back of all of our readers, we have the code knowledge that is needed to be able to decode these texts. Now, it's important that this time is cumulative practice time. It's not explicit teaching time. So it's important from an educator's point of view that we have already had that explicit instruction and students have knowledge of the letter sound correspondences that they will encounter in the text. So that first key consideration about decodable readers needs to make sure we also have the code knowledge before the reading process. Now, another consideration is differentiation. Now, some students may just first be learning that code knowledge at CVC level, where they're just starting to blend. And that's why we've now got two series of books. Both of these books are samples from level 4. Let's take a closer look at the two types of books, looking at our samples of level 4. In the first book of our main series, we have Nat's Dolphin Power. This text was designed for year 1, so the word count, the word complexity is aimed at students that have knowledge of blending skills with the new letter sound correspondences with the maturity of already blending past CVC level. It's more than likely you have vulnerable students in your classroom that require more time to learn the letter sound correspondences, more time to be able to have that blending practice, and we have to reduce their cognitive load. So having words with just CVC, which is consonant, vowel, consonant, larger font and less words is really appropriate for those types of students. So that's where our new early reader series comes in. If we have a closer look at this sample from our early reader series, it also is level 4, so it follows the same letter sound correspondences. You can see that the text contains words with mainly 3 to 4 sounds. Having these types of resources where you can follow the same scope and sequence but differentiate for your learners is very beneficial at classroom level, as well as sending the right readers home to your students for home reading. All right, let's have a look at key consideration number 2. The first step is decoding. Comprehension and understanding is extremely important, but the first step is being able to lift the words off the page. And that's where we have to spend the majority of time when students are first learning to read, to be able to decode the words. This quote is from Dr. Anita Archer. There is no comprehension strategy powerful enough to compensate for the fact that you can't read the words. That quote really sums up why we need to maximize the time spent supporting a student with the decoding process. So that leads me to our next key consideration. Use strategies that focus on the decoding process. Now, this decoding poster really helps students understand the process of decoding, but more importantly for you as an educator, it really assists how to prompt when a student makes an error. As you learnt in the previous video, an educator needs to go through these strategies very quickly prior to the reading and then only refer back to them if an error is made and you need to go back to prompt a student at the different levels. Now, while we're talking about corrective feedback and responding to students when errors are made, this is a great time to talk about the technique called pause, prompt, praise. In my experience, this technique works wonders. That pause time is just very short, just a couple of seconds. Often when a student is reading and they come to a word that they don't know and they're doing that process of sounding out, they may be sounding out in their head rather than articulating them verbally. So what we want to do is just prompt that verbal articulation. That way you can see if an error is being made. But give them just a few little seconds to be able to get to those strategies. Now, maybe a student comes to a word that they don't know and they just freeze up. That's why just a couple of seconds is enough before you move to the prompting stage. Here are some of the prompts that I like to use with students. Now, let's say the student looks to you for help or they completely guess a word that is inaccurate. I then go straight to the modelling process and talk them through it. Let's have a look at this word. Let's sound out those sounds and blend those sounds together to read the word. So then I model the process and have them repeat that process back to me. Now, let's say the student is having a go and they're blending that word, but they're blending it incorrectly. So this is going back to that example of an unknown letter sound correspondence. What I do is I say the sounds for them and then have the student blend it again while you run your finger across the word with the expectation that they are blending at that pace. Now, depending on the students in front of you are the types of prompts that you would use. Sometimes when students become very familiar with their educator that's supporting them, it might just be picking up a pen and sliding it, or the back of the pen, and sliding it across the word underneath to prompt to blend those sounds together. Because if you've got new students that tend to go straight to the picture because they've learnt in that way, it really puts the focus back, sets the expectation of what you want them to do without any words. Just blend those together. So it's putting that focus back on those words. So your prompts are extremely important because we want to prompt always leading to the decoding process. And the last one is praise. When students do a great job, give them a quick little praise, and if you can fit it in without disrupting the flow of the lesson, tell them what you're praising them for. I like how you blended those together. These considerations are important for both parents at home doing home reading as well as educators in the classroom. We want to pause, prompt, praise, and make sure that those prompts are really leading to the decoding process. Before I go, I really want to address the pedagogical approaches in a classroom sense. Now, the traditional guided reading approach, where you have a small group of students that come to you and you support during that small group instruction. Now, I like to call it supported reading rather than guided reading. The reason being that guided reading has this connotation that we're grouping students based on a benchmarking leveled system. Now, we need to make sure that if we are grouping students, that they have a similar phonic knowledge so that the type of text that we are using is going to be appropriate for them, as well as their fluency ability. Taking in those considerations when grouping students really helps educators choose the right text for your small group that's in front of you. Now, I really want to address the pedagogical approach of round robin reading. Now, in a whole language balanced literacy approach, this round robin reading was how you implemented guided reading, where every student takes a turn to read a page or a sentence on the page. Now, this has many flaws. The first one is that the engagement and the instruction for the students was very limited because you are only allowing one student to read at a time. Now, some other flaws is that students are pretty cluey and they know when it's their turn to read, so they can switch off until they need to have that expectation to read. Another flaw is embarrassment. Some students really struggle with reading aloud to their peers, especially students that are having reading difficulties. They can already sense the feel that they are not as competent as their peers, and putting them into that environment does not assist their well-being or their motivation to achieve. As educators, we need to choose pedagogical approaches that eliminate those types of flaws. So if I have a small group in front of me, what I like to do is set up the expectation that all of them will read the entire book, especially when we're talking about decodable readers. They are manageable to read the whole story on their own. So I place them with a big gap in between, and it is me as the educator that jumps in between as all of them are reading to listen and do that pause, prompt, praise. This allows me to give instruction to each child but have all of the children engaged. Now, at first you might think, oh, it might be too noisy for them, but I really challenge you to give this pedagogical approach a try, because engaged students really tune into their books. Now, you could also use the phonics phones, or the fluency phones as we call them, by the time they get to the guided reading stage. And these fluency phones really allows the student to hear just what's coming from them, and it really allows them to tune into their story as well and not be distracted by the others. So there you have it, a few key considerations about supporting readers on their first read of a decodable text. Join me next week as we talk about strategies for repeated reading and the benefits of repeated reading on fluency abilities.